Welcome to the Release Show. I'm your host, Brittany. On today's show, we have Lockey Maisonneuve. Lockey is a successful author and speaker with a past filled with tremendous obstacles. Her childhood was stained by sex trafficking, abuse, alcoholism, and abandonment, which aimed to set her on a path of destruction. She knew that gut-wrenching experiences would bring about downfall, but they were too heavy to erase with sunnier thoughts. The more she tried to forget her past and push towards peace, the more the anger and unhappiness doubled. Fortunately, after years of talk therapy, yoga, tapping, journaling, and guided meditation, Lockey finally opened up an inner dialogue and began to dismantle the disquieting conversations inside her head and heart. She found her strength and dedicates the bulk of her time to helping people who have gone through similar occurrences. Her book, A Girl Raised by Wolves, tells her story in a very engaging, inspiring way. Let's welcome Lockey.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
Let's begin this show by talking about your childhood. Where did you grow up and what was it like?
Well, when I was a child, I was born in Colorado. My father was in the Army. I was an Army brat. And we very soon after that moved to New Jersey, where my parents lived together and apart. They separated when I was very young. And both of my parents were alcoholics. And my father left for parts unknown when I was 5. And I don't know where he went or what he did. My mother, who was, as I said, she was an alcoholic. She did the best that she could with the resources that she had. She was a very sad and depressed person. Therapists who have said that she had multiple personalities, but I mean, I can't prove that, later in therapy. And we lived in southern New Jersey, where my mother did the best, as I said, that she could. When I was around 10 or 11-ish, she sent us to, presumably she sent us to go spend the summer with my father, who again was an alcoholic. And he had been estranged for so long, I didn't even know where I was going, who I was going to be spending time with, really. She sent my older sister and I, and we pretty much went from the frying pan into the fire in terms of neglect and abuse. It wasn't long before my father started selling me into sex trafficking, and my sister left and came to New Jersey, which is where she and I sort of parted ways as well. And I was left to my own devices to manage sort of raising myself and dealing with what was happening to me at night and on the weekends when my father brought me to these places and men raped me and then paid him money for it. I can say that at around age 14, I stopped the abuse by confronting my father and saying I was not doing this anymore. And I called my paternal grandmother, my father's mother, and said, either come and get me, or no one in the family will ever see me again. And my father's sister and brother came down and picked us up, packed everything up, what little we had, and we moved back to New Jersey, where I went to work blocking out everything that happened to me. And it wasn't a conscious choice. It was later learned in therapy, it was the only coping mechanism that I knew that would work. I blocked everything out. I did such a great job of blocking things out that I didn't remember any of my childhood. And even when I began to remember what happened to me, it all came in bits and pieces, and it came back in fragments. So when I say, I was 11 when the abuse happened, there's a disclaimer in the front of my book about blocking out memories and how I can't put a timeline back together properly. So there's some things that are still happening. And I assume that as I continue along this journey, I'll remember what I can and not remember what I can't. So Yeah. So my life started out in southern New Jersey, ended up in Florida where the abuse was quite intense. And then I came back to New Jersey. When I came back to New Jersey, I was in a freshman in high school, and my father stopped drinking. It's the only thing I'll ever give him credit for, is that he put himself in a VA hospital. He was a veteran in Pennsylvania, and he did get clean and sober. But he never went to work on what the root of his addiction was about. You know, he never went to work on why he did the things that he did. And because of that, he was what they call a dry drunk. So when I was in high school, he abused me 2 more times. And it was when he was sober. So any justification, if I ever had a justification of, oh, he was drunk or he was not in his right frame of mind, kind of destroyed that story or that idea that I had. So that was when I decided that men are unsafe, the world is an unsafe place, and I'm completely on my own. And I lived my life from that perspective of I'm completely on my own. And it was at that time I went out. I was in high school, but I got a job. I never asked my family for anything. I did live with my paternal grandparents during this time. And my father lived with his brother for a while, and then lived in his own place with a girlfriend who didn't know anything happened to me. I didn't even remember it at the time. But I will say this. It's the number one thing I always tell people who have experienced trauma, who are working out their healing journey. There's a thing about kids. When kids are traumatized and when kids experience trauma, it's sort of like the world tells you who they think you are. And at first we believe it because we don't know anything else to believe. The one thing I could never quite get straight for myself was how adults would make assumptions about me based on what they were told. So it used to really upset me. So my father had this girlfriend, and the family decided that I would be moving in with this girlfriend and my father. And she basically sat me down and said, I know all about you, and you're going to live by the rules. And I was like, okay, but you can't possibly know me because we've never spent a moment together. You know, not really, you know, the 2 of us, you know. And so my life, it seemed like as I was growing up, every adult that I encountered had a story about me already. So I would fight the story, or I would succumb to the story. But I never knew who I was inside of the story, other than I just wanted to get the hell out of there. So it was an interesting dynamic to grow up in. And this might sound all intellectual, but I've had, you know, a minute to think about it. So, because as I go along my own healing journey, I have a lot of examples of people that I work with, because my work is exclusively with trauma survivors, right? So, so you have to understand my backstory to understand the work that I do today. And I know that your original question was, where did you grow up? But it sort of builds on where I grew up, and what happened to me builds on to obviously my life story, right? But also the work that I do now.
Great. Thank you for that information. The typical child is born with loved ones wishing to create the best reality for them. How did your childhood gradually become sour? And has it always been that way?
Well, again, I talked a lot about it, right? But what I do remember specifically is at a very young age, I remember thinking, I'm not like these people. There's something else out there that is a different way to live, right? Not right or wrong or good or bad. I just knew that I was different from the people I was related to. And I had actually created sort of this imaginary family. And I have a whole story in my head that I was adopted, and that my family, my original family, put me up for adoption sort of accidentally, because in a child's mind, you know, how do you navigate, how do you balance that, right? I had no balance for it, so I would just say they made a mistake. And I had a whole story that this other I just had to hold on until this other family came back to get me. And I remember thinking that at 16, 17 years old, that something else was waiting out there for me, right? In this case, it was this other family. And it was a family that was kind and loving. And, you know, it's kind of funny to say out loud, but they had a swimming pool and they had a dog. And they were going to let me have a dog, and they were going to let me be in charge of things, because I never felt like I was in charge of anything. So my childhood, as I said before, was based in people telling me who they thought I was, and people breaking down my spirit and my will, because that's what happens in an abusive relationship. So it was very hard for me to reconcile all of that. So I began to make things up, like my family that was looking for me, right?
Okay.
That was how I was able to cope with the abuse that was happening. Does that make sense?
Yes. It makes sense. According to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, there are over 40 million victims of sex trafficking. Most of these individuals wish to exit that reality, but find it difficult. How are you able to escape that life of sex trafficking, abuse, and alcoholism?
Well, I wasn't an alcoholic. My parents were. Both of my parents were alcoholics. So I used my imagination a lot, right? Like there's a coping mechanism called dissociation. So especially with kids who are being abused, they will dissociate. They will check out. And the brain blocks those memories, right? And I would honestly say that I think in terms of how did I get through it, a lot of it was the blocking out, right? The dissociation. It was also, I've always had a really good sense of humor. And I always had a knack, and I think it was a knack that I cultivated throughout my life, that if you're ever in a really awkward situation and there's one person that says that one thing that everybody's thinking that is the most inappropriate thing to say, I can say it and get away with it. I can say it and people will laugh, and it'll cut the tension. And so I would definitely say that my sense of humor, so using dissociation and my sense of humor and my sarcasm has got me through a lot. And a lot of dicey situations, because I diffuse situations. I diffuse complicated situations with my sense of humor. Okay. And I'm talking about everything from being on a job interview to I teach yoga right now to incarcerated men. And you walk in the room and look at me and go, "What are you doing here, girl?" And I'm like, "I know, Starbucks was closed, but I'm yoga," you know, and they'll kind of look at me like, "All right, something's off with this one. Something's different." And that's how I've always connected with people, is through my sense of humor. So I would definitely say that my superpower that it got me through is my sense of humor.
Okay. You talk about blocking out feelings and disassociating those emotions. But in life, a lot of times those things start to come back and revisit your mind, even though you try to block them out. How did you deal with that? I know you say you use your sense of humor, but when those thoughts came back, what did it do to you emotionally?
That was sort of the crux of my healing journey. So I always knew, even though I blocked everything out, I always knew my level of anger was not appropriate to my lifestyle or to who I was, right? I was told that I had a vicious tongue that was like a razor blade. And that if I wanted to deflect or get rid of someone, I never put my hands on people because I don't believe in physical violence, but verbally, it would be, sometimes I would hear myself say things and it would scare me. So I knew there was something, I knew there was something that was not appropriate, if that makes sense, right? Like, easy to say, and even therapists over the years have said to me, I understand the anger because you had alcoholic abusive parents, but your anger is not extra even for that. And you go from 0 to 60 in too soon. It's almost too soon, right? So what I realized was that something was off, and I just didn't know what it was that was off, right?
Okay.
But I knew how to repel people that I didn't feel safe around. But even the level of safety, I could go into a restaurant and I knew immediately, I would scan the room and I kind of knew who was safe and who wasn't. Just like that person is wearing a red shirt, so he must not be safe, whatever the reason was, right? So what I realized was that something was off because my anger and my fears went a little deeper than my own understanding. And like, for instance, I never sit with my back to a crowd, ever. I always sit with my back to a wall when I go into a restaurant. Or if I'm out in public, I do everything I can to sit with my back to a wall or something where it makes me feel more grounded, right? And that was not a normal response to, again, my lifestyle, right? So I started really looking at that. And then when I had my first child, my son, I mean, and then, everything was fine. I had a little boy. He was the sun and moon. And, I loved him as any mother would, right? But then I had my daughter. And when I had my daughter, things changed. I was inappropriately nervous with anyone holding her or touching her. Excuse me. And what I realized was even I'm married, right? And I have my husband. And with both of my kids, it was very different for me. With my son, I was like, here, go to daddy. And, like, daddy will love you and all that. With my daughter, I remember crying once and looking at my husband and saying, just give her back to me. You can't hold her. And I knew that because my husband is the safest man I've ever met in my life. And I went to a therapist about that. And that was the beginning of the unraveling. When I had my daughter, that was the beginning of all of those, all of my blocking mechanisms were starting to come down. And I thought I had postpartum depression. And I went to a therapist and I said, listen, I'm pretty sure I just have postpartum. I just need some, some tools and tips to get rid of the postpartum. And she went, oh, okay. Are you a therapist? Like, how do you know you have postpartum? And I was like, I read it in the book. I'm sure that's all I have. And she said, no, I don't even have one symptom of it. And as I was leaving her office, the appointment was over. And she said, let's make an appointment for a couple of weeks out. 2 or 3 weeks later, right? And I said, okay. And I turned around and said, the strangest thing is that I keep having this feeling that I was raped. And I keep seeing these images. I didn't know at the time they were flashbacks. And I said, I keep seeing these images of a little girl being raped, and I don't understand what it is that I'm seeing. That's why I think I have postpartum. And she took the little business card that she gave me her appointment, my next appointment on. She tore it in half. She took it back. She wrote her home phone number on it, and she wrote an appointment for the following week. And she said, if anything comes up, give me a call. And it was almost as if when I said those words out loud, I went home. I lived in a town called Hoboken in New Jersey. It's a mile square. You walk everywhere. If you live in Hoboken, you walk everywhere, right? I walked home. My husband took my son. I put my daughter down to sleep. She's a baby. My husband took my son and they walked into a couple of blocks away to get pizza and bring it back for dinner. And by the time my husband came back, I was laying in the fetal position on the floor in my kitchen, and everything had come back. Everything that I can still remember had come back. It was like a floodgate opened. And my husband walked in and saw me on the floor, and he went, oh my God, what happened? And I said, the baby's fine. I just remembered my father raped me, and I was raped. And that is how I was no longer able. According to my therapist, when you're abused and you have a same-sex child, it's very common for the memories to start coming back. And you have these flashbacks. And that's what I was having. But I was having visceral flashbacks first. Visceral flashbacks meaning I felt like my wrist being restrained. I felt hands on my throat. I felt myself punched. I felt myself being held down. And then I would start to see an image. And it was almost like my brain would only give me what it thought I could handle. And even that was too much because nobody wants to see that. And that's how the memories started coming back. So even then, even though I always used my sense of humor and my sarcasm, what really became my defense mechanism was anger. I was horrible to my therapist. That poor woman. I've always said, I think there's like a support group somewhere in New Jersey of therapists who've been stuck with me. Like, I was really mean to these poor therapists. And it was like my anger came out to them. As funny as I can be, I can also be that angry, and I can also be that mean with my comments. So my coping mechanisms really were a mixture of my humor, my sarcasm, and my anger. And I really wasn't comfortable with any other emotions. That was it. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of how I got through it, how I coped until I couldn't cope anymore. Until my brain said, no, we're done. You're going to move on now. We're going to do something with this.
So you talk about anger a lot. How would you say your anger level is now?
It's so much better. If it was on a scale of 1 to 10, if it was a 10 before, it's like a 9.5. No, I'm just kidding. It's like, if it was a 10 before, it's probably a 3 or a 4. Okay. I still get angry. I would never lie and say I never get angry anymore. Of course. But I'm able now to, I have an extremely mindful practice of remaining as present as I can possibly be in my life. And part of that is also checking my anger, right? Like if I find myself angry about something, the first thing I'll ask is, A, is this appropriate? Is this appropriate? Brittany, you're so sweet. I would never get angry at you. But if I did, my first question to myself would be, is it Brittany that I'm upset with? Or is it Brittany that I owe an apology to, or that I need to ask for an apology? Is it really about Brittany, right? Or is it about, I just had an argument with somebody in a supermarket before I came to talk to Brittany, and I'm thinking about, and I have also, I don't know if I'm proud to say this or not, it's a little embarrassing, but I can direct my anger. Okay. Like for instance, if you said something that upset me, I would probably not let you see the full extent of my anger, right? But in the back of my head, I'm feeling some certain type of way, and then I go and maybe pick an argument with my husband to expel that anger. Right? I'm learning to be more aware so that I don't want to do that. I don't want to take it out on my life. But what happens is a lot of times, and I'm sure this will be no shock to you or your viewers, a lot of times, anger is really just suppressing fear. Fear. That's really what it's about. So I'll ask myself, what am I afraid of? So yes, I still have feelings, and I still get angry, and I still have feelings of insecurity, and I have moments of self-confidence, and my self-esteem is much better. But at the same time, I am present enough to accept my own humanity that I'm not perfect and I never will be.
That's right. Do you still go to therapy?
On and off. I do. I have this amazing therapist that she uses different modalities. So she'll use, do you know what tapping is? EFT?
No, yeah.
Where you're tapping, it's an emotional freedom technique, and it's tapping, and it helps to sort of move energy around your body, right? So we all have energy that sits in our body. Well, in the mindful community, we believe that we have energy that sits in our body, and when we can move that energy around, sometimes it's through tapping. It's literally what I'm doing right now. It's just tapping. Right?
Okay.
You have it's directed, and you have a conversation while you're doing the tapping, right? And so she uses that. She uses something called internal family therapy, which I am not qualified to explain. We've done journaling together. She uses a lot of different modalities, because a lot of times when I go to work to try to sort out my flashbacks and the memories that I do have, it's upsetting. And it's hard for me to stay present when I do that. So instead of just getting angry, I'll say to her, I can't stay present on this. I don't know how to. So she'll employ another technique. And what's great about her is I saw her for a very long time. I saw her religiously. And now I literally have her on speed dial. And if I were to send her a text today, I'll send her a text and say, I need a little tune up. Something's coming up. And makes herself available to me. So while I'm not in a steady therapeutic program right now, I am very connected to mindfulness and being self-aware of doing the best I can to remain present as much as I possibly can. Because as a trauma survivor, we love to check out. We love to daydream. We love to stop paying attention. It's just what we do, because that's what got us through. So I'm very careful to make sure I'm doing everything I can to stay present and self-aware of what's going on around me, in and around me.
Self-awareness is very important. So it's good that you're able to identify that with yourself. Most people, at some point in your life, you were accused of killing your mother. Can you tell us how this accusation began and what it was based on?
Well, my mother was in and out of my life. So until I was about 5 years old, I said that I lived with my mother. When I was 5 years old, my parents separated and I was living with my mother. And then around the ages of like 10 or 11, she told us we were going to spend the summer with our estranged father, who we found out was living in Florida. And when I got on the airplane with my sister explained to me that we had one-way tickets, that we were not invited to go back home. And my mother didn't tell us. So that was the first time my mother gave me away. And then we went to live in Florida, and all the abuse got much more intense. And then, as I didn't speak to my mother for 24 years. And I just assumed if she didn't want to be in my life, why would I want to be in hers? And I don't go chase anybody who doesn't want me. So I didn't speak to her for 24 years. And then I married this amazing man, and his family was so close, and so they still are. They're so close and they're so wonderful that, I was like, oh, maybe I can have that too. Maybe I can have that on my side of the family. So I rekindled my relationship with my mother. And again, similar to my father, she had stopped drinking. But she never went to work on why she drank in the first place. So she still had a lot of her issues that she was dealing with that were hard to interact with. So we tried to be in each other's lives, and it didn't work out. And she kind of, she actually said to me that I was hard to love because I expected to be loved. And I expected things from people. And I said, no, that's what we call a relationship, right? Like, we're in a relationship. You don't call me names, I won't call you names, that kind of thing. And she never saw it that way. So I distanced myself from her. Again, this time it was by choice. It just was not healthy for me to be in a relationship with her. So I didn't talk to her again for, I don't know, a decade or so. And when she died, she was murdered in her, lived in a, this is like such a like a country western song thing. She lived in a trailer park and she was murdered. And I mean, I only smile at that because it's so, my life is so, it's just so surreal. But I got a call from a detective who said, "We're sorry to tell you, but your mother has been murdered." And I went, "Okay." And they said, "Can you please come here and answer some questions?" And I said, "Sure." I said, "Can I just ask you one question?" And they said, "Yes." And I said, where does she live?" And they went, "Oh." And that started a 2-year-long murder investigation. And in the beginning, there was a question of whether or not I had done it. But as soon as the police saw me, they realized that I couldn't have. Because when I turned 40, well, a year prior to my mother's murder, I had been diagnosed with breast cancer. And I had, that's why I was saying it sounds like a country western song, because it actually gets worse and then it gets better. But I had breast cancer. I had just completed chemotherapy, radiation. I had a mastectomy on one side and then a mastectomy on the other side. I was all taped up. I was bald. I was not rocking this hair. I was bald and I was extremely, and my mother was stabbed to death. So there, as soon as they saw me, I could not lift a glass unless my elbow was right next to my rib cage, because I couldn't, because of all the muscles that they had cut. So my mother being stabbed to death was sort of obvious that I could not possibly have done it. So that got me off the list of suspects quickly. And I am proud to say that while unfortunately my mother's case is still unsolved, the two detectives are personal family friends, and they came to my book launch years later, which sounds strange, but it was really nice having them there, and we still keep in touch. And they did everything that they could to find the murderer, but unfortunately, where my mother lived, it was riddled with criminals. It was just, yeah. So that was the story of that, of my mother, my estranged mother being murdered.
Now let's talk about your book, A Girl Raised by Wolves. What's the meaning behind the title?
Well, that's part of my sense of humor, is that when before my husband and I got married, we lived together, and we both had professional jobs, we both had people lives with friends, and 99% of the people I was friends with all went to college, and I never did. And they all had what I thought were normal upbringing and, privileged lives and all that, right? And so I was embarrassed. I never wanted to talk about my family. So they would all sit around, and if they were talking about, holidays when they were growing up and things like that, I didn't want to say anything. So when someone said, like, "What was it like in your house at Christmas?" I would go, "I was raised by wolves. Let's have another drink." And I would deflect the conversation. And again, I would use humor to deflect. So that was how I had all kinds of goofy names for this book. And then I was talking to, I think it was actually the detectives. I was talking to them about it, and they said, "Well, how do you share?" I think it was actually them. Now that you're saying this, so funny. It's just something I just remembered, that they remembered me saying that to them. And they said, "Well, that's what you always say to people." And I went, "It's really good." And that's how the book sort of named itself after that.
What convinced you that your story is something that must be shared with the general public?
I think because it started when I was diagnosed with cancer, right? So I was a personal trainer when I was diagnosed with cancer, and I was pretty fit, right? My hair wasn't as long as it is now, but it was, shoulder length, whatever. But when I was done with the chemotherapy and the radiation and all that, and I had to go back out, to the world, right? My hair was really short. It looked like a crew cut, you know, the way it is when it grows back. And everybody would say to me, even with my hair short like that, they would go, well, you don't look like a cancer patient. And I always thought it was an odd thing to say. So, and I understand why people say it. I just always thought, being the recipient of the question, it was odd because it would make me think things like, well, what should we look like? And as I, you know, after I remembered everything that happened and when I was a child and all the crazy things that I have experienced, as I began feeling it, you know, I would share my story a little bit here and a little bit there, and people would always say the same thing. You don't look like a girl who was raped by a mother. You don't look like a girl who was raped by alcoholics. You don't look like a girl who blah, blah, blah. And I would always say, like, well, what do they look like? Right? What do they look like? So one therapist, actually not my therapist, a therapist said to me, I don't know what it is you're looking for. Girls like you either end up on a pole or with a needle in their arm. And I, wow, she just set the bar like really low. And it was all of that sort of came together to the point where I was like, you know what? I actually survived some stuff. And I actually want to go in and I want to support other people who feel like me, who feel like they're not worthy of sharing their story, or their story isn't enough, or their healing isn't possible. Because there were years that I felt like I was trapped in a box. And that box was a girl who was sex trafficked, a girl who was white trash, a girl who was not even worthy of being loved by the very people who brought her into the world. And why would I be worthy of anything else? I had nothing to contribute to the world, and I just felt like I had nothing to say. But the more I put myself out there, almost out of desperation to create a sense of validation for myself, the more I realized that people resonated with my story because I didn't look like my past. I don't look like my history. I don't look like, you know, I'm a little disarming in that I don't look like the stereotypical, with whatever the hell that is, I don't know, but the stereotypical person who has been through the things that I've been through. Sort of like the people that I work with now. You know, I work with gang members. I work with incarcerated men. I work with murderers. I work with people in drug and alcohol rehabilitation. And quite often people have come up to me outside of my work and said, why do you do work? Why do you do the work that you do with those people? Which to me is the same question, the same, you don't look like a cancer patient. To me, that's the same question. Because I was saying, what do they look like? Because I have people in three-piece suits sitting in my rehab class right next to somebody with facial tattoos. So what does that mean? So that's really what it was for me. That why do we all think that someone should look a certain way? Right. You know, and yes, there are stereotypes. I totally get it. But if you only see someone for their stereotype, if you hear trauma survivor and think, oh, that person's broken or that person's a mess, you're not even going to give them a chance to discover how amazing they can be. So that was what really broke the whole thing down for me, was what are we supposed to look like?
Right.
You know?
A lot of times we're judged by the outside and not the inside.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, the guys that I work with, I work in this facility where I teach. It's a drug and alcohol rehab facility, and I teach mindful programs. And there's a group of guys that I work with who are, we do a class called A Mindful Approach to Reentry. And they're guys, some of them were released during COVID because of COVID. Some of them have been released, they're only out 2 weeks, and some of them are out 2 years out of incarceration. And the funny thing is, 99% of them will walk into the room and take one look at me and go, what are you doing here? Like, who are you? I have to get I know I look like a white lady from the suburbs of New Jersey because I am a white lady from suburbs of New Jersey. But I always say to them, but you're a gentleman who just got out of incarceration. How come you're not wearing a jail uniform? Right? That's stereotypically what I would have to say. And I always say, you hang around, because I might not be exactly what you're thinking. I might actually be showing up a different way by the end of the day. And I adore every single one of them, because every single one of them will high five me when they leave, and they'll go, "You're all right. You're one of you can compare Sunday barbecue."
Nice.
Yeah, because I understand that wall of trauma, and know that what's behind that is a human being that looks very similar to you, to me, to the next person you look at. And the first thing I tell everyone I work with is, you're not broken. I do not see you as broken. In fact, I refuse to even entertain a conversation about anyone being broken. So if you're not broken, then I don't have to fix you.
That's a good point. You don't see people as broken people.
Yeah. And the first thing that, if you're assuming that the person standing in the front of the room already believes that you're broken, then you're already assuming that they think they know what you need to be fixed. So as soon as I can get that off the table, then they look at me like, okay, so what are we doing here? I'm like, I don't know. We're going to find out together. I have a theme. I know what we're going to talk about. I planned out my class, but I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Right? It might be a hot mess, or it might be something really good, but let's find it out together. And that is the thing that has healed me the most, is the people that I work with, and being of service to other people, to realize that even though I have a story, I can make you laugh, I can make you cry, the whole thing. We didn't even talk about me being chased up a tree by a wild boar when I was high. That's a whole, you have to buy the book for that one.
Besides being an author, you're also a certified yoga and meditation guide. Please tell us more about this profession and how you apply for it.
Well, I'm embarrassed to say, and I'm proud to say, that when I first started practicing yoga, I went there with the explicit intention of breaking yoga. I was going to be the one that proved yoga's stupid and it's dumb. And yes, I literally went in, I'm that arrogant. Like, I'm talking a level of arrogance that you can't even get. Yoga is a thousands-year-old practice, but I was the one to break it, which is bananas, even whatever. So very soon after I began practicing, what I noticed was my anxiety was different. I noticed that my feelings about people were different. I was extremely judgmental when I used being judgmental as a coping mechanism, as a defense mechanism. I would make a decision about someone, and that was it. They were done. They had no room to go anywhere with me. And what I noticed was it was starting to break down. My yoga practice was making me start to break down some of my judgments. For instance, I live in New Jersey, so we see a speed limit on a road and we assume that that's like a suggested number that you might want to follow or not. At least I do. And we have a state long road called the Parkway. And on the Parkway, it's just, a road that goes all the way down. But they have all these exits, right? That you can get off. And I used to be the type of person, I'm embarrassed to say this, don't do this at home, kids. If someone cut me off, I would follow them until I could cut them off, even if I had to get off their exit. That's anger. And what I noticed was, as I began practicing yoga, I was driving down the road with my husband. He was driving, he drives way too slow for me, but he was driving down the road, and he gives them the hand. My kids call it the hand. Like, he'll be like, "What are you doing, you dummy?" or whatever, right? And he did that when somebody did whatever indiscretion they did. And I I turned around and I said, honey, how do you know that that person didn't just get news that their child was dying or that they have cancer? And my husband turned around to me and went, who are you? And I was like, that's embarrassing. But I noticed with the yoga that things started to shift for me. I was softening around my edges, right? The things that I knew, like I knew black or they were white. There was no gray. There were starting to be some fuzzy areas of gray. And that was when I went, there might actually be something to this 1,000-year-old practice. And I started to really embrace it. And I started to really look into it. And I found myself one day on my yoga mat crying. And I didn't understand why I was crying because at the time I did not cry. And I went home because there was no way I was asking someone about this. And I Googled, in the Google search bar, I put, why would someone cry during yoga? And I found an article written in the magazine called the Yoga Journal, which is a highly regarded magazine for yoga, which I actually ended up in the magazine, which was a whole full circle moment in my life. But the article talked about this woman who was a psychologist, and she did a study on the mind-body connection. Now, today, they're doing all kinds of studies on that. I'm talking back in like 2010, 2011. She wrote an article where this field was just becoming a field, right? And she talked about the mind-body connection, and she was saying how when we practice yoga, we open up places in our body where energy is stored. And energy from traumatic experiences, negative energy, gets stored in our body. When we practice yoga, we get to release it, which helps manage anxiety, depression, PTSD, rage issues, healing the past, right? Getting unstuck from things that we believe are true. I believe like it was the truth that I was a white trash girl who had no value in this world. I believed it and I lived from that. And I started to really, like, these conversations started to sort of unravel right before my eyes. And that was how my practice of yoga really solidified itself in my heart, really. And I was still going to therapy. My therapist is a very dedicated yoga practitioner. And I got my certification. It was nuts that I even thought to get my certification. It was really what I wanted to do because all of my healing, anything I've ever healed in my life, I've always believed that the best way to heal is by being of service to other people. Because when you see yourself in other people, right? Well, I do. I see myself in other people, and I see people and go, I remember when I felt that way. I remember when it was so new and raw to me that I didn't think that it was possible. And then I'll look at somebody else and go, wow, they are so far ahead of me in this realm of healing of whatever. I can't wait to get there. So I wanted to be of service to other people. So I obtained my yoga certification, and I knew from the beginning I wanted to work with trauma survivors. And I tried working in yoga studios, and I thought I'll just get an Instagram following, throw up some yoga poses. I'll become an international yoga teacher, and I'll run retreats all over the world, right? As you know, it didn't turn out that way. So you know what they say, when you make plans, God laughs. I ended up in, I don't know if, are you familiar with New Jersey at all?
No.
So obviously I live in New Jersey. We have a city in New Jersey called Newark. And it was known as one of the, dangerous, bad, blah, 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 drug cartel, gangs, everything, right? That's where I do 90% of the work I do now. I ended up going to teach through an organization called the Newark Yoga Movement. I was teaching yoga in the school systems in Newark. And I tried teaching in the beautiful studios where, we would drop our kids off, go throw on our cute little yoga outfit and run into a yoga studio and do yoga. right? And I tried teaching in those studios, and I love those studios. If it weren't for those studios, I wouldn't have a yoga practice. But I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel like I was being of service. And then a friend invited me to this Newark Yoga Movement organization where they go and they bring yoga to the kids in Newark and into the school systems. And I walked in and I was hooked from the moment I got in there. And I ended up being on their board, and I've been there forever. And from that, we ended up teaching. We were contacted by a local jail that's in Newark, and they asked us if we would come and teach, and we did. And I've been there for a few years now. With COVID, I'm not there. COVID's over, we're going back, and we ended up teaching. We did a stint at a hospital. There's a hospital that it's called University Hospital. It's kind of a famous hospital around here, and it's where most of the I hate to say it, but violent crimes, the victims of violent crimes go to, like gunshots and things like that. And they have a group that came in that called us and asked if we would go in and teach yoga to gang members. They were starting this program in the hospital where they figured while the gang members and people who were affiliated with gangs were convalescing from, bullet wounds and things like that, and stabbings and whatever other kind of physical violence, we would use that time so we could teach them conflict resolution and mindful practice. So I started teaching yoga to gang members, and I love. They're amazing. They're scary. They're scary as you know what, but they're not really. Like when you first walk in, they were the ones who would look at me and go, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, "Starbucks, have a seat. Let's do some yoga." "Where are you going?" "You're on crutches anyway. You're not going to run from me." So we started. It was amazing, and that led to other work that I do. I teach in another city called Perth Amboy. I teach in a drug and alcohol rehab facility. I teach in a drug and alcohol rehab facility in Newark, and I teach in the psych ward of a hospital called Trinitas in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And the cities that I'm naming are all the cities that have more marginalized communities, and they're communities that if you look at my face, I don't belong in those communities, or I won't say I don't belong. I stand out in those communities. One lady came up to me and said, "You'd fit in here better. You should braid your hair or something." And I started laughing. I was like, "Okay, but you have to teach me how to, braid my hair." But anyway, literally the work that I do today is a direct reflection of my own healing journey. And I've had to get out of my own way about a lot of things that before I went to teach yoga in the jail, I went to my therapist and we had a session. Luckily for me, she also worked in jail when she first became a therapist. So she kind of understood what I was walking into. And she said, "What makes you want to go work in a jail?" And I said, "Well, before I answered the question that I want to be of service, right?" And I said, "But I'm afraid if I go in there and somebody is in for sexual assault or some kind of sexual offense, that I'm going to judge them. And if I bring judgment onto a yoga mat, I'm done. I'm literally done. I can't be of service to anybody." So she and I went to work on how do I feel about this? And the number one thing that I got out of that session that I am forever grateful for is I always thought I was kind of a racist. I wasn't sure, but I always thought, do I have some racist tendencies? I never thought that anybody was better than me or I was better than anybody, which to me was a big part of the definition of being a racist, right? Is that you think you're superior in some way to another, right? I never felt that way. So I was like, am I a racist or maybe I'm a bigot? I don't know what it is, but I do know that when I hear an African-American man with a deep voice who's big, right? If he stands over me and sort of yells, like if they were standing behind me and they were to yell at someone across the room, I would get really scared and really tense. And I thought, something's wrong with me, because it doesn't happen with other people. At least I thought. So I was talking to the therapist about it. And she said, okay, let's talk about your past and your other interactions with African Americans and people of color and blah, blah, blah. And we couldn't find any issues. My husband's Haitian. We couldn't find any issues. And we were like, I don't know what it is, right? And then I realized, I'm not a racist at all. Unfortunately, when I was being trafficked by my father, the majority of the men were men of color, of lots of different colors, right? But it was their voices. That's what I was afraid of, because I couldn't always see what was going on, but I could hear. And it was their voices. And when I came to that realization, first of all, I was very relieved to find out I was not a racist. And I was also relieved to find out that I can go in there with a clean heart now. I can go in there with the purest of intentions. And that's why sometimes, not all the time anymore, because I kind of like, I'm not going to say people know me by reputation, but when I walk into a room, I feel comfortable enough in a room now that it's not an issue for me, but I can see if it becomes an issue for someone else. So I'm not afraid to say to people, so what do you see before you? A white lady? Let's talk about that. What's your history with white ladies that look like me? And I've had them say, I had a teacher who called me out. I had a probation officer. I hated her guts. I had this, I had that. And once we can get past that, then it changes everything. So to me, part of my work is putting everything out there, right? The only thing we don't talk about, no, that's not true. We pretty much talk about anything. Because you can't be of service to a group if you're willing to talk about everything except skin color and perceive our judgments. You know what I mean?
Yes, I know what you mean.
Yeah. So there's a lot that goes into it, but at the same time, I love the work that I do, and I love that people allow me the opportunity. When I start out the conversation with, hey, you guys, guess what? I used to think I was a racist. I always go, hear me out first. Just give me a chance, hear me out. And if you want to yell at me after that, we can, I'll let you do it. Like, we're there. But I don't think you're going to want to yell at me. And when I say that, I've had men of color come up to me and thank me and say that they've been around women before who were nervous around them, and they never considered that it might be their size, or that it might be the sound of their voice, or some affectation that they have. They assumed it was because they were a man of color, because that was the easiest thing to assume. So it's actually when you can admit to things like that in an effort to be of service. There's so many doors that you can open. There's so many conversations that you can have, that they'll ask me questions now about the experience of, well, when I go into a store and I see some crazy white lady like taking out a video or whatever, what do I do? And I'm like, well, I'm not that bad that I'm taking out videos yet, but you never know. They still do. So we just sort of work it out together. And that to me is being of service. That's a healing conversation. You can interact with a representative of what it is that you have feelings about. Does that make sense? I hope
yes. Yes, it makes sense. Yes. Well, I'm happy with the work that you do, and happy that you're not a racist. But even if you were racist and you identify with yourself that you were, if you were taking the steps to heal from it and retract those thoughts, that's good. We can't hold people accountable unless they don't want to change.
Yeah.
Like, I can help it if you were a bad person before, but if you decide to change and, do better, then okay, I appreciate it. I mean, there's races all around, and I know it's really big right now, but I've never really had to live that life. And so I've had people speak to me about it. I've never liked been around like racism like that. I never really had to live around that. I had white friends, I had black friends. I never saw color ever until like now. And I feel like I have to teach this to our daughters, and I don't understand why, because I didn't have to live it. So it sucks, the world we live in, but hopefully, things get better in that conversation.
I hope so. And I hope I didn't offend anybody in the audience by saying that, because it wasn't meant to be anything offensive. It was just, that was my experience, and that is part of my healing journey. And we're never going to heal if we don't actually do the work.
That is so true. And I like how you brought up yoga and how powerful it is. I didn't even realize it. I honestly feel like I should go take some yoga classes, because I want to heal some of the things from the past or things that people have recently done to me, so that I can get past that. I don't like to hold on to negative things, but I also don't like when people do things to me that are hurtful, and then I'm supposed to just be like, okay with it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't like that, because I'm not a bad person, so I don't go around doing bad things to people, but I have to learn how to let go of things that I don't have control over, you know, and it's hard, it's really hard, because like I'm trying to deal with it. And I've been in many therapy sessions on how to retract the mind and do all these kinds of things. Because I never want to hate someone for what they've done to me. I never want to, try to hurt them back. That's not my thing, tit for tat stuff. But I do want to heal from it and move forward and try to understand why and just leave it alone. I want to get past it, but I feel like every time I feel like I'm past something, something else happens and it brings me back to that space. So I'm not over it. I'm not past it. I'm not healed from it. And so I feel like, I should go take some yoga classes.
Well, one thing I can tell you is one of the things I learned was the things that happen to us, right, that are out of our control, the best we can do is make our peace with them, right? And I will never lie to you about this. If the people who raped and abused me walked into a room that I was in and they were on fire, I would not hand them a glass of water. Like, don't get it twisted that I have some, I'm not Mother Teresa and I don't pretend to be. That said, I'm not going to take it out on the next person because someone who looked like that hurt me, or someone who showed up that way or whatever, right? I'm also going to do everything that I can to make peace with it. And I say make peace rather than forgive, let it go, release. I used to say let it go a lot. I even led a workshop called the Let It Go workshop. But what I found out was, through interacting with trauma survivors, a trauma survivor that I was working with once said the problem with letting go is that once you think you let it go, it's gone, meaning it'll never return, right? But if you learn all the lessons you needed to learn and it comes back, now it hurts twice as much to let it go, and it feels like now it's your fault, right? So then we turned it into, okay, well, what can you release, right? Because if you release something, to me, it's like a wave comes in and the wave goes out, right? So maybe let's call it release, right? But even to release means it's going to come back. And I've sort of morphed all of that into, what if we were just able to make peace with it, right? And you know how they say life lessons will keep coming up until we learn the life lesson, right? Have you ever heard that? Yeah. So maybe like maybe something that happened to you recently, if you were to look at it, it might be that there's a pattern of that form of, let's call it a form of betrayal. I don't know if it was actually a betrayal, but let's say it was a form of betrayal. If there's a pattern of that, and if you're thinking thoughts like, oh my God, that is the same thing that Bob did to me 2 years ago. Oh my God, I remember in 8th grade that happened to me, right? That's a pattern of that betrayal that keeps showing up for you. So maybe there's a lesson in there that you haven't learned yet, whether it's, I don't know what the lesson could be, right? But did you ever meet somebody who's in a relationship and every relationship they get cheated on?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's sort of like that, right? Or every relationship that you're in, you cheat on somebody. I used to have a girlfriend that when she wanted to break up with a guy, she never wanted to hurt his feelings by saying, I don't want you anymore. So she would cheat on him and make sure he caught her. Somehow that was better to her. Like, I don't know how that's better, but in her mind, that was how she processed it, right? So for me, when I'm dealing with things where I go, why does this keep happening? I really try to remain watchful, not vigilant, but watchful of where am I going with this? What's going on with that? How am I interpreting things? And just to see where I'm accountable, right? And if I can see where I'm accountable, then I can make peace with it. For instance, if I go to a room, right, and I'm about to teach 15 African-American men yoga, which that's kind of my job. And one of them says, oh, Lockie's a racist. I promise you they misinterpreted something. I promise you they did, because I'm not a racist. And I know in my heart and I know in my head that I'm not. Now that said, I'm not going to negate their experience. If they feel I did something, that made them feel that way, I want to hear about it. I want to talk about it. I want the chance to apologize, because whether or not I actually did it, they have the experience of it, and I will never let them go. Meaning I won't step over it and pretend it's not important, because it's important to them. It's important to that person who had that experience. But I know in my heart, that's not what I am. So if I do something accidentally, whatever, 100% I'll apologize. Does that make sense? Like, I'll apologize for that. That's me being accountable for how I show up in the room. I can't be responsible for how it's perceived or how people react to me. Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense. You can't.
And that's where I can learn to find a peaceful moment or I can learn to make peace in whatever it is that I'm experiencing in the moment. If that makes sense.
Lastly, it makes sense. Lastly, as a survivor and a professional, what steps do you think people can take to heal their trauma and find happiness again?
First of all, realize that it's your trauma. It's your timeline, it's your trauma, and it's your experience. So for the people I know people who have been, who have shared stories with me of being raped or abused in some kind of way. And they'll go and tell someone, and the person they tell will say things like, were you drinking? Was it real? I mean, was it really what you thought? Was it really? And that's not the person you should be speaking to. In fact, they're off the team as far as I'm concerned. If you can take ownership of, this is my trauma and I'm going to heal it the way I choose to heal it, you can make so many changes in your life immediately. So the first thing I would do is really take hold of it and take control of your own trauma. Your own healing journey from the trauma. Meaning, if you're seeing a therapist that you love, continue seeing the therapist. If you're seeing a therapist who you feel like has their own agenda, they probably do, and you shouldn't be with that therapist, right? They may be a great therapist, they're just not your great therapist. The other thing I would say is, once you take ownership of your healing experience from your trauma, look around and see what works for you and what doesn't. So for me, it was yoga, and I went kicking and screaming into yoga. But once I gave it a chance, I loved it. For some people, maybe it's art therapy, maybe it's meditation, maybe it's journaling, maybe whatever it is. It could be equine therapy, where you go and you work with horses, right? Find some healing modalities that may not even make a lot of sense in the moment, but if you're drawn to it for some reason, go with it, because you probably need some aspect of it. And the other thing that I would say, there's two other things that I would say. One is listen to your internal dialogue. Most people have an internal dialogue, and it's pretty negative, right? I teach a whole class on how to interact with your internal dialogue, right? But it's also your early warning system, those thoughts that we have in the back of our head. Start really paying attention to them and dismantling them. My thought was always, well, a girl like you. I would literally hear my sarcastic voice in my head, a girl like you, you're never going to get that. Or why would you want that? Or why are you being so uppity to think that you, of all people, who the hell wants to hear from you, right? I would live into that and I would listen to it. And that voice was created to protect me. And as an adult who's beyond the trauma now, it's holding me back. So if you can look at that voice, listen to that voice and see what's really true and what's not. And then the final thing is, whatever it is that you do try, whatever healing modality that you try, take from it what works for you and just leave the rest behind. There are aspects of yoga that I love and adore. And there are other aspects where I'm like, no, that's not really for me. I just let them go. And I hold on to the things that work for me from each modality that I've tried, yoga, meditation, journaling. And what I've done is created a handy little toolbox for myself that I know these are the things that I have. And these are the things that work for me in the particular times that I need them. So they're the things that I would really say is really just be responsible for your own healing. Be accountable. It is your healing journey. No one gets to tell you how to do it. Pay attention to your inner dialogue and really look around at other healing modalities that might just, kick some other things into high gear. That, those things that you feel stuck on, maybe shift a little and go, okay, I'm stuck on that, but maybe I can go look at that. And shameless self-promotion here. Please read my book and pay particular attention to my theory and my opinion on forgiveness, because most of the people who've read my book, those private notes that I've received, I would say 90% of them are people thanking me for sharing what they've always felt about forgiveness that they wouldn't say out loud for fear of, people thinking they're terrible. So, forgiveness is a big deal.
It is. It is a big deal.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on this show and sharing your story. Please let everyone know how they can purchase your book and continue to follow your journey.
You can go to my Instagram page, which right there under my name is Lockey Maisonneuve. That's my Instagram handle. You can go there. You can go to Amazon. We sell the Kindle version on Amazon, or you can go to my website, which if you Google A Girl Raised by Wolves, you'll get everything. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of it. And you can order the book, and I sign every copy, and you can send me emails. If you have questions, I'm more than happy to support and share. So thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Release Show. See you next time.
Thank you, Brittany.